live. Hi, everyone. Let's turn this light on. I don't know if it'll stay on. Hi. Welcome to Christy's Corner, where we talk about culture, conservatism, Christianity, and common sense. I'm so glad you're here. I was sitting here catching up on Daniel about the statue. That was in Daniel chapter 2. Anyway, thank you to my subscribers. You guys rock. If you like what you see so far, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you stick around to the end of the video, I thank you. And I'd ask if you'd please consider sharing and subscribing and commenting. Those things really help the channel. Like, share, and subscribe, my 4 favorite words. All right, so this week I'm going to open with something that Bobby Kennedy said that really resonated with me. He was explaining Make America Great Again. And here's what he said. The phrase has troubled liberals who think it is a call for a return to an America before civil rights, gay rights, and women's rights. But I have a more generous interpretation, one that is truer in my experience to Donald Trump as he is today. Make America Great Again recalls a nation brimming with vitality, with a can-do spirit, with hope and belief in itself. It was an America that was beginning to confront its darker shadows. It could acknowledge the injustice in its past and present, yet at the same time, it could celebrate its successes. It was a nation of broad prosperity, the world's most vibrant middle class, an idealistic belief, though not consistently applied, in freedom, justice, and democracy. It was a nation that led the world in innovation, productivity, and technology, and it was the healthiest country in the world. I've talked to many Trump supporters. I have talked with his inner circle. I have talked to the man himself. This is the America they wish to restore. Mr. Kennedy, well said, sir. Very well said. And I apologize if I didn't quote you word for word. We'll call it a paraphrase. Okay, so I ran a poll this week of what you guys would like to talk about. And the 3 questions were education versus indoctrination and how we got here, Bible prophecy coming true, or your favorite Star Trek episodes. Well, I would have liked it if that had won. But anyway, education won hands down. So that's what we're going to study. I think it's going to take a series of videos to cover this topic because it's pretty big. When I was doing the research for it, I thought, oh my gosh, okay, this is going to be at least a 3-episode video. So this is part 1. And for my fans, my actual fans, I have started learning how to work the software, and pretty soon there won't be blinds behind me and pictures that, well, that's Louisiana. That's pretty interesting. I will have some actual video and stuff going here pretty soon. So I'm excited about that. Okay. To instruct in a doctrine, principle, or ideology, especially to imbue with a specific partisan, biased belief, or point of view. And the word imbue means to hammer home. So let's do that again. To instruct in a doctrine, principle, or ideology, especially to imbue with a specific partisan, biased belief, or point of view. Obviously, that's the definition of indoctrination. And the definition of education is pretty much the opposite. Here you go. The transmission of knowledge, skills, and character traits manifesting in various ways. There's a bit of controversy on the actual definition of education because it's so broad. Yet we instinctively know that it means the transmission of information. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. It's general information. You learn something and you have a choice to do what you want with it. Indoctrination, on the other hand, is the transmission of specific information, like I said above, a point of view, a principle, an ideology. And what you do with that information often becomes that of what the transmitter wanted you to do with the information. It's the transmission of belief. And therefore, there's an inherent lack of freedom in indoctrination. Now, it's not necessarily bad, right? Not all indoctrination is bad. We indoctrinate into religious beliefs, points of view from parent to child, family to family, community to community. But the indoctrination that we're experiencing today, and why this topic, one, I think, is what we're being indoctrinated into, right? And we all know what that is. It starts with a C. I don't want to say it because I've been shut down already. You don't know how many videos now I've made that have been cut out. They'd be a 30-minute video and it's 3 minutes long. But we know what we've been indoctrinated into, and that's why we're talking about this tonight. So this has been going on for at least 40 years. It really goes back a lot further than that. But 40 years ago places us smack dab in 1984. Did you read it? I did. I reread it in 1984. I remember I'm kind of old. How about Brave New World? Did you read that? What about Asimov, Heinlein? Did you read Dune? How about Stephen King? Back in the 80s, I was reading all of that, all of those works. And the poem that I referenced last week by William Butler Yeats about the center not holding. Hi, bear with me. That poem that I referenced, Stephen King had used it in his book, The Stand. Did you guys read The Stand? It was a long book, I know. And they made 2 movies out of it. Yep. But it was a dystopian novel. It was about an illness that there was no cure and very few people survived, and society split into good versus evil, right? Well, when we had our crisis in 2020, I'm sure I'm not the only person out there who was thinking of that book. But okay, so dystopian societies. Let's get back to the one we're talking about now. How we got here. Okay. So a lot of people don't like to talk about history or study history, and I get it. No one wants to memorize dates. Most people don't want to memorize dates. Most women don't like to talk about battles or study battles. But we know that the history of man is the history of war. And I think most of us realize right now that understanding how societies rise and how they fall has become very important, because we're in a crisis and we know it. We know it. We can feel it. One thing, this is from Victor Davis Hanson, and I put his link in the description because I really think he's an important voice that we need to be listening to right now. And he has been saying pretty frequently lately that every civilization that fell, the one thing they had in common, every single one of them, is that they didn't think it could happen to them. They never thought it could happen to them. Every civilization that fell never thought it could happen to them. Sound familiar? You know, we felt that way for a long time, haven't we? But we're looking around and going, what's happening in Aurora, Colorado? What just happened in Chicago? What about Posse Comitatus? We can't have this is some serious situation. A lot of motorcycle gangs, they were talking about motorcycles going up and helping, and let's just hope that cooler heads prevail and the law is followed. Fingers crossed. Saying a lot of prayers. RFKJ, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been talking about a political realignment. So in the midst of all this, you know, and he's right. He's right. There is a political realignment going on. We know that. The Republican Party is becoming the party of the independents. They could almost change their name to the Independent Party or the Constitution Party. So many Democrats are coming over. But I think it's more than just a political realignment that we're seeing. And that's why I brought up Aurora and Chicago last night. I think we're in a reformation, a reforming of society. You know, one of our presidents said in 2009, we're 5 days away, just 5 days away from fundamentally transforming America. Well, transforming it into what? We know what, and it's that C word. It is that C word. Okay, so we're going to have to talk about history. If we're going to talk about how the heck we got here, what's going on with our education system, why are we flat out indoctrinating our children now? We're not even hiding it. What is going on? So let's look back a little bit. First of all, writing. Where did writing come from? If you're going to talk about education, you got to talk about writing. It was discovered in the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, which again, I'll have pictures soon, but imagine a map of the Mediterranean Sea and north, south, east, west. To the east was Jerusalem, Turkey, and Mesopotamia. Iraq, modern day Iraq, Iran, that area, Jordan, all of that to the east. To the west was, you have the boot of Italy. Italy kicks down into the Mediterranean Sea and looks like a boot. So that's Rome. Greece was right in the middle, kind of in the northern Mediterranean Sea. So you've got the circle, and in the north middle is Greece. Northwest is Italy, and northeast and east was Mesopotamia. All right. We don't consider the Fertile Crescent the beginning of Western civilization. Ancient Greece is considered the beginning of Western civilization because ancient Greece gave us democracy. Not only did they give us democracy, they also gave us scientific, social, cultural inventions. They gave us histography, the study of history, the Olympics, geometry, philosophy, theater, medicine. It's a fascinating culture to study. So we consider ancient Greece the foundation of Western civilization and thereby the foundation of education. All right, so Greece's timeline. Oh, I want to put out one point because this is always in the conspiracy theories. They weren't technically a country until 1831. They were a group of city-states. The Aegean Sea is the northern Mediterranean where Greece backed up to. The bottom part where Athens was is what we consider modern-day Greece. North of that was Macedonia, where King Alexander the Great, came from Macedonia. We'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, it was a whole conglomeration of city-states, but they were all trying democracy. Not every one of them. Sparta was very militaristic, and Sparta and Athens were constantly at war. And there's a whole nother series of wars. You could have the Peloponnesian, you could just study that for a lifetime. You could study that for a lifetime. I think VDH did. Anyway, it goes back to 1100 BCE, and that's about the same time as King David. It's about 100 years before King David. So if you want to parallel there. And the historians refer to that as the Greek Dark Ages because they weren't writing in those days. All right. But the Archaic period followed that from 776 BCE to 500 BCE. And it's what makes that really interesting to me is during that, Rome paralleled Greece at the same time around 700 BCE. They were starting to coalesce into a society. I haven't studied why tribal communities and city-states and different villages coalesce into a society. I think that's a fascinating topic that maybe we'll look at one day. But regardless, around 775, 776 BCE and 700, both cultures began to grow into a civilization. Okay. That brings us to 500 BCE. What follows that is the Greek classical period, which is the famous period where we have the explosion of ideas in medicine and the playwrights from that time, Euripides, so many others, Socrates and Plato are from the classical period. And here's an interesting thing about Socrates and our topic tonight. Socrates held that the supreme ideal of man, and hence of education, was not the spirit of efficiency and power, but the search for the absolute, for virtue, for knowledge and understanding, the search for truth. So not just Socrates, but the philosophers of the day in the Greek classical period put education above just about everything else. Good health, the Olympics, the Epicureans were all about perfection. It's a fascinating culture to study, and it makes sense of why it's the foundation of Western civilization. It really does when you study it, and we'll go into it in depth later. But for right now, following that period, the classical period, we have the Hellenistic period. The whole world became Hellenized. This is 323 to 31 BC. So right before Jesus. It began with the death of Alexander the Great. So I mentioned him earlier. Alexander the Great conquered the entire world before he was 30 years old. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. And the Greek language became the language of the day. I need to study this further because I'm not sure who understood, who realized that if they all spoke the same language, they could conquer them. They would have a better access to trade, better access to education, better access to material, yeah, not just trade, but materials, resources. Anyway, the whole world spoke Greek. Okay, around 200 BCE. So we've got the classical period, the Hellenistic period from 323 to 31, and everything becomes Hellenized. Helen of Troy, yes, from the Peloponnesian Wars. During this period, around 200 BCE, Rome begins to really put forth its full might. Rome was much more militaristic than Greece, valued resources and money over education and improving the body. And Rome was ingenious. Their ingenuity made them very, very powerful and very wealthy very quick. You know about the Roman aqueducts that are still in use today in Europe. That's pretty amazing. They invented cement. They are the ones that invented concrete. Roads. One of the reasons the Romans were so successful and so wealthy when they finally took off was they're the ones that figured out that if you build up the road with a little bit of a hump in the middle, then all of the water will run off and the road won't be muddy. What does that do? Well, of course, it dries out a whole lot faster and you can move huge numbers of troops down that road, along with wagons that would have in muddy roads gotten stuck in the ruts and been really hard to get around. Well, if the road dries off super fast, now you can move wagons of equipment, all kinds of soldiers, and they began to conquer everything around them. And the Roman siege became a battle tactic. They would build a square wall around an area. That would build several of them around a town or a mountaintop or a city that they wanted to conquer. And they would have all the supplies they needed to starve out that town or mountaintop or whatever it was. When we were, not Troy and I, but when one of my trips to Israel, I went to the tourist spot to Masada, and we went up the mountain to the very top, and it's a story in and of itself. That's a wonderful. It's a sad historical actual happening. King Herod built the mountaintop of Masada. But when you're up there and you look out over the plain, you can see the Dead Sea off to the distance, clear as a bell. But you can see these Roman encampment walls, these squares in the ground where they were encamped to starve out the Jews on top of Masada. So Rome made it their goal to defeat Greece. So Alexander dies, and the Greek community, the Greek empire gets split amongst his 4 top generals. After that, they pretty much went the way of most civilizations. They fell. Greece fell. Now, I wanted to throw in something here. Daniel's statue in chapter 2 of the Bible. I know we're not talking about Bible prophecy. What I do with my glasses, but I wanted to read this to you because it talks about Greece. It says, "You were looking, O king," and I am in chapter 2, verse 31. King Nebuchadnezzar's had a dream, and I'm starting to run out of time, guys, so I got to wrap this up. Well, we talked about Rome. We're going to talk about the decline and fall of Rome next week. And then I'm going to get into the Dark Ages of Europe, the Norman Conquest of 1066, the Reformation, Enlightenment, Renaissance, and then the Prussian Empire and what happened prior to World War I, and that's really where we got our indoctrination from, as opposed to education. But anyway, let me read this real quick. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. You were looking, O king, and lo, there was a great statue. This statue was huge, its brilliance extraordinary. It was standing before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of the statue was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked on, a stone was cut out, not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is a statement about the 4 kingdoms after Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold of this statue. The arms of silver were the Medo-Persians who defeated Babylon. The middle and thighs of bronze was Greece, and the legs of iron were Rome. The feet of iron and partly iron, partly clay. Most people believe that is the revived Roman Empire that will be in power in the end times. We can get to that at another episode. But for right now, we're at 6:23. Is that what time it is? Or is it 6:28? Oh, we're 6:23. So we still have a few minutes. But let's see if I covered everything, guys. I did. So we could start to talk about the decline and fall of Rome if we want, but there's so much to it. Let's just throw this out there. In 323 BCE, CE, after death, AD, Antidomingo, after the death of Jesus, 395, Rome, what did I say before? I don't know what I said before, but in 395, Common Era, after the death of Jesus, Rome split into 2 kingdoms, the northwest of Rome and Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, Turkey, was the eastern section of it. So the legs of iron, there were 2 legs. That was the split of Rome, one in the east, one in the west. The eastern side had to kind of worry about the Persians mostly, but in general, it was pretty peaceful. They really didn't have a lot of dust up. The western side, the Rome, Italy, that part of it had constant battles with the barbarians that surrounded them. The Huns, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. Ostrogoths and Visigoths were right to the northwest of Greece. So that would be modern day Romania and Bulgaria. Those pretty countries in there, Hungary. They were in that area. Then to the Europe, Anglo-Saxons, which was a little bit later, but the Gauls in France. And there was a constant back and forth battle before 395 BC. It started probably 187 BC. CE. I keep saying BC. After Jesus, y'all. After Jesus. Anyway, the Rome split into 2 empires. The Eastern Orthodox Church is still pretty much the same as it was. Western Orthodox, Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholic Orthodoxy, a little bit different than it was back in those days. But because of that split, it ended up weakening the empire. And for a whole lot of reasons, Rome fell. And there are a lot of parallels to the fall of Rome with what's going on with the United States right now. But that's going to wrap it up for this week. I'm so glad you were here. Again, if you like what you heard, please share and subscribe. And put some comments in the comment section for me if you would. Next week, a little more detail on the fall of Rome. Then how we went into, after the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages. Why was it dark? Because there was no writing. And then the Norman Conquest by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Very interesting. So I have some more details next week, and I just look so forward to seeing you guys. hopefully I am almost to the point where I can start putting some videos up during the week and not just on Tuesday nights at 6. But thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful, blessed day. Father God, I pray for the whole audience, whoever hears this video, whenever they hear it, that they would accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And in his precious name I pray. Amen. All right, in stream. Hey, hang on. Wait. Ooh, we're rocking around. There we go. End.